I heard him. They had him a tape from the old Olympics on the other night on Olga Corbett, and his voice. It was when he was. It was fun hearing him again. I haven't heard him at the Olympics in so
Sounded
long.
good, didn't it?
And he was the Olympics for so long, and now
Oh,
of course it's another network, so they never mention him. But
oh no.
but
Well, there's a
it was
certain amount of jealousy there, I think. I don't know. I mean, but he was like the
he
Olympics. I
was.
mean, and not only Olympics, but I thought like some of the important golf tournaments, like
Yeah,
the British
British
Open and
Open. Yeah,
whatnot. You know,
yeah.
he'd give a little set the scene and all.
But it was just to hear about his days when you guys first started, and when that first race, I can see you guys at Pimlico with the guy walking by with the ladder, and not knowing.
Oh, you want me to get into
Yeah,
that?
We want you to tell us all your secrets, Mr. Kelly.
he didn't have any secrets.
All
You're
right.
an open book.
Well, let me know when you're going to get started. Are you going to introduce us?
I'm not going to talk much in the video. It's mostly just going to be clips of things that you have to say, because I don't think people want to hear my voice. They want to hear from you. And I wrote down just a couple of topics to kind of steer you, and then you can talk about those, and when you run out of things to say, I'll give you another topic.
Well, what I meant is, are you going to introduce it? I mean, you're going to be
There'll
on
be an
first.
introduction, but it won't be, I'll record that later. We'll just record our conversation for now.
Okay.
She can edit Joe and stuff.
Yeah, and you want me to get into the Maryland Million immediately, right? I mean,
Well,
sort of set the scene.
we can do that, or we can talk about, I'd like to know a little bit of kind of how you got into racing, what your first memories of the track are, who took you to the track initially that got you so interested, and how you ended up doing what you
I
did.
took myself.
You took yourself.
How old were you though? And where did you go?
Well, I didn't get into it too early. I actually, in school and whatnot, I was pretty busy and I didn't go to races. I actually missed the where Admiral Seabiscuit race because I just wasn't going to the track and I didn't have any money anyway, so it didn't make any difference. But I regret it now. But
what year was that?
38.
That was 38?
Yeah, I was still in school, college, pretty busy. But other than that, well, let me know when you're going to start.
Oh, I've already started.
Oh, have you? Right.
I turned the camera on, and
Okay.
we can edit out what you don't want to include. So.
Well, I think I got started in horse racing at a fairly young age. And I do remember my first bet was on a horse, famous horse. Everybody's forgotten him, perhaps, a horse called Whirlaway. And he won a Triple Crown in 1941. And he was sort of my idol horse there for a while. And was a great horse, no doubt about it, long gone. At any rate, through the years, I drifted into horse racing at the Baltimore Sun when writing general sports, and then sort of, as I say, drifted into horse racing. It was an opening, and the Sun was expanding coverage, and I was picked as one of the new reporters on the Maryland circuit. And we covered all the racing. Some of the half-milers, but mainly the mile tracks in those days. And that was in the later 40s, 1940s. And that's where I met Jim McManus McKay. He was a police reporter on the Sun, and they drafted him into their new acquirement, which was a Channel 2, which was the first TV in Baltimore in 1946, I believe. And anyway, Jim was drafted as a staff announcer, and eventually we did the first, what they called remote broadcast out of studio in Baltimore in 1947, October. And incidentally, I believe it's going to be the 65th anniversary coming up this fall in 2012. We went to Pimlico without any scripts, one camera, and covered a short meeting, 2-week meeting in the fall. And how it went, I don't know. I mean, there's no record of it. They had no tapes in those days. And it just went on the air, and that was it. And if people criticized it or whatnot, well, that's what resulted. But it was fun, and as I say, we had no instructions. We didn't know exactly what to do. We covered 2 races. We tried to get people up for interviews and stuff like that. And it went very, very well, I guess, because the next year it was repeated until the networks took over, and then, television kept developing and developing. But I think when we were on the air with that first broadcast, mainly people saw it in bars or in restaurants because there were very few home sets receiving the signal. And then Jim went on to different occupations in TV and sort of lost track of him for a few years until he hooked up with Roone Arledge on the ABC and eventually on the Wide World of Sports. And Jim was a natural for that. So from there on, of course, everybody knew Jim as Jim McKay because some agent had suggested his original name was too long, McManus. He became McKay. And he eventually wrote a book on his life called The Real McKay. So that's how he got, as he sort of slowed down a little bit on the TV assignments, he decided he'd come back to Maryland and sort of retire or semi-retire or whatever. And that's been a tale that's been told many times on how he decided that Maryland should get into a special race for Maryland sired horses. In other words, it was a program designed to bring mares from all over the country to Maryland stallions, and then the result of their mating would be special races for those horses, and it came up with the name of the Maryland Million because they wanted to run a series of races, and I believe it was Chick Lang, who was general manager at Pimlico at the time. He came up with the name of Maryland Million, which caught on. Jim was the real engine that started the Maryland Million. What they really needed to start with, as most projects, he needed money. They needed money. And Jim, it eventually came down to Jim selling sponsorships. And he used to say the worst thing he could think of doing was to go into a boardroom or before some executives and try to sell them a sponsorship in the Maryland Million. But he was successful originally, and that was in the mid-'80s after he had, tested his idea on the racetracks, and they went along with the idea, of course. And Jim No brought in the money. Budweiser was one of the sponsors, and some other nationally known companies joined in. That's how the Maryland Million got started, with the wherewithal. The first Maryland Million race was held at Laurel, 1986. And there was a certain amount of skepticism about whether it was going to take, because some people said the races would be dominated. It was a great stallion in Maryland at the time, Northern Dancer, and they said all of his uh, breeding results will dominate the Maryland Million, and eventually it'll just discourage small breeders. Well, that didn't happen. The first Maryland Million, as I recall, I think there were 2 horses sired by Northern Dancer, and other stallions got into the act. And that's why, one of the reasons why the Maryland Million thrived. And that first Maryland Million, Laura, I'll never forget, Jim and I happened to meet in the grandstand somewhere just by chance, and we were going to walk down to the sort of headquarters, or the, I don't know, we were heading for the winter circle, I think. And all of a sudden, of course, people started recognizing Jim from his television experiences. And people were coming up to him, shaking his hand and saying, "We're glad you did this," and all that sort of thing. And I could see that Jim was, started thinking, maybe this is a big success, And it was. There were 20,000 people at Laurel that day, 20,000 plus. And it seemed like a type of crowd that was really into the act. They were enthusiastic. They were, everything they saw they liked, and that's how it got started. And that's, in a way, is why the Maryland Million is still going for its 27th running this year, 2012. Doesn't seem possible, but it grew, and a lot of things were responsible over the years, though, for keeping it going. I mean, the Maryland Million had a day itself has a sort of a different touch than even the big days at Pimlico. It's somewhat like the Preakness, but not the same. I mean, it's more down to earth. It's hard to explain, but it is a certain atmosphere there. And I think, of course, Jim gets a lot of credit. Jim died a few years ago, and he sure did go out a winner as far as the Maryland Million is concerned.
That's perfect.
That's great. That's great, Joe. Yeah, that was good. That was a good.
Well, I don't know. I was rambling.
That's exactly
what
what
we
we were
want.
looking for. Because
Okay.
I can cut and chop
Yeah,
clips.
yeah.
And we just
Now,
want
is there something missing you wanted to say about? Anybody want to get into this year's specifics a little bit?
I want to talk more about your stuff, Joe, about you and your other. It doesn't have to be Maryland Million, but your favorite races or memories of the Preakness or memories of
any races that made impressions on you, or horses, or
Pimlico and
horse people in Maryland. Or,
yeah, people. I mean, Buddy
Yeah.
Raines.
Okay.
Some of your Buddy Raines
Is it
stories.
The horse racing in general always seems to have another story. I remember when I first started, the boss at the Sun, the sports editor, told me, he said, "Listen, there's a story under every barn roof, if you can find it." And I think he was right about that. And the Maryland Million sort of fit in with it as far as I'm concerned. But of course, over the years, there were some great things. Now, my favorite at the Maryland Million, I think, was the second one when Jim McKay's bred horse, well, it was actually bred officially by his wife, Margaret, Sean's Ferrari. And he was a 2-year-old that, it was just a long shot, just another filler or something. And all of a sudden, this jockey Lafitte Pinkai, one of the best ever in America, Panamanian. Here he comes down the Pimlico stretch with Sean's Ferrari, and no one could believe it, including Jim. And as far as I could see, it was the first time Jim didn't have a word for it. So Billy Boniface saddled the horse and paid a big price. I forget it, I think about $70 or so. And it was just another great story. Over the years, there have been some wonderful horses with stories. I think the race seems kind of strange, but Bill Boniface trainer seemed to be involved. But the year that he won the Preakness with deputed testimony, which was a homebred horse and sort of an outsider in the Preakness in 1983. It was a terrible day at Pimlico. It was absolutely a deluge. It was everything was underwater. Finally stopped by the time of the Preakness, and I'll never forget this deputed testimony. He wasn't even at the track until 11:30 that morning. He was shipped in late. He trained at home, Bonita Farm, and I have this great memory of him. It was the field swung a little bit wide at the quarter pole, and a jockey named Don Miller found that spot, came through that hole, and then just sort of out-galloped the field through right on the rail and kept going. I didn't think he was going to make it, but he made it easily and won the race and paid a big price. I remember my wife, she was there, and she had bet across the board. I didn't even bet on him, and she was screaming, and that memory sticks in my mind about that deputed testimony, and she was screaming, "Come on, Billy." She was rooting for the trainer. And got what was considered a big payoff. And it was one of the great stories of family breeding and all breeding, Maryland breeding, sort of reaching a real big day, unbelievable. And right after the race, Bill's father, who also was named Bill Boniface and worked with me for years in Baltimore Sun, he was a racing editor. He got me aside right after the race, and he says, "Tell me something." And I said, "What's the matter, Bill?" He says, "Is this really happening?" I said, "Yeah, it's real." He said, "I thought I was dreaming." That was a big day at the races. One of them. Yeah, of course, there have been some disappointments too. I remember one year, I think it was 1962, Tommy Kelly, who was a local trainer for years and then became nationally known. Anyway, he had a 3-year-old named Globemaster, and he told me one day at Pimlico in the barn area, he said, "Listen," he says, "there's one thing I want to do in my life." He says, "I grew up around Pimlico and I want to win the Preakness, and I think I got a very good shot this year." And he was sort of a superstitious trainer. He didn't like any photographs of his horses or anything. Anyway, they ran the Preakness, and Globemaster is on top at the 8th pole by 4 lengths. And it looks like he's a sure winner. And he keeps rolling a little bit farther, and here comes a horse on the outside. And he's closing ground, and the horse is named Carryback. And Carryback overtakes him and beats him, and Globemaster finishes second. And I always thought that's one of the heartaches of the Preakness. Tommy Kelly, his horse, just missed. I mean, he was beaten by a length or so, but it was one of those things when he looked like he had it in his hand, didn't win it.
Any other horses stick out for you?
What about
or-
Secretariat? What do you think about the them just changing the time on his, giving him the record on the Preakness? What do you were there that year?
Yeah, later on, Secretariat came along. It was like it was 25-year gap between Citation and Secretariat for our Triple Crown winner, and people were talking about they should change the races distances or do something to make it a little easier so we get a Triple Crown winner. So along comes Secretariat, and he just dominated the opposition that year, and there's no doubt about it. I mean, he went into the Belmont Stakes and the opposition was just sort of spent, and well, everybody knows, I think he won the Belmont by 31 lengths. But in the Preakness, he won easily. It was he had no trouble with that field. But after the race, there was a great deal of discussion and not official protest, but about the time. The time was kind of suspiciously slow. I think, as I recall, it was 155 or something like that, and change, which the teletimer at that time put up. But private clockers caught him much faster, like I think it was 153 and change, whatever. Anyway, there was a lot of discussion, and they found out that at that time they had I think it was officially known as a Visiomatic timer. And earlier races at Pimlico had been questioned too before the Preakness, so it made it doubly suspicious. And eventually they determined that someone had apparently stepped in and broke the beam on the first quarter of the teletimer, and that caused the race to be slower because the horses, when they broke, they were just fractions behind that person had walked across the beam by mistake. At any rate, eventually, and just recently, they determined that the time was incorrect. They changed it once right after the Preakness, but the people who owned Secretariat were not convinced that that was the correct solution either. So then they eventually used the tapes of the race, original tapes, and determined at the time and got it down. I believe it's accurate now. It's been changed, and it's officially changed. And as I say, it's just a matter of time. So it took about, 35, 37 years to do it. So Secretariat himself is buried down at Claiborne Farm in Lexington, Kentucky. So if he's in horse heaven, he's probably feeling better.
How about a Buddy Rain story? What about the Greek money?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Another famous Preakness in my book was in 1961, I believe it was. Buddy Rains trained for Brandywine Farm, which was a Delaware farm, among other horses. And Buddy Rains, the trainer himself, was an absolutely irreplaceable character, a wonderful guy, he really was. And he had a million stories, it seemed, about horses and his experiences. He had been a cowboy and ridden on a range and just grew up with horses. That's all he knew. And at any rate, this year, that spring at Pimlico, I was working for Washington Paper and Washington Star. Went over to the barn a few days before the Preakness and just wanted to more or less talk with Buddy and see what he was going to do. And he had this 3-year-old named Greek Money. And I said, ask him, I said, "Buddy, are you going to run?" He says, "Well, I don't know." He said, "I don't know just what to do." And he says, then he pulls out an envelope out of his pocket. He says, "What do you think of this?" And it's a letter from some woman who said, in the letter I read, he said, "Read it." And I read it, and it said that she had a dream that this horse, Greek Money, would win the Preakness. And had some, reasoning. And Buddy said, "What do you think of that?" I said, "Well, it's interesting. I don't know, but strange things happen." He says, "Well, what do you think I ought to do?" I said, "Well, here's the thing, buddy. How's the horse doing?" He said, "Oh, he's doing fine." I said, "Well, you don't get too many chances. Why don't you enter him and run him?" And I said, "This letter here, give it a chance." Something like that. We were kidding about it. Anyway, the horse got into the race. It was a terribly hot day at Pimlico. I remember that. It was like one of these days we're having now. And Greek Money was a contender most of the way and down through the stretch. The ride day in a horse that had run in the Kentucky Derby teamed up with Greek Money in a terrific battle down the home stretch. Now, Greek Money had not run in the Kentucky Derby, and Johnny Rotz was riding Greek Money, and the mad Panamanian Yakaza, Mike Yakaza, was riding Friday, and when he hit the wire, you really didn't know. Most of the crowd didn't know who won the race, but the camera gave it to Greek Money, and everybody thought, "Man, it was great." Everybody's starting to celebrate, and here comes a foul claim by Yakaza. He claimed he was fouled. So in those days, the stewards, in order to
Hang on just a second.